Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Hover, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Today, we are going to tackle the global warming problem head on. So a little bit about my background. I've got a degree in mechanical engineering from Cal State Fullerton. Got that many moons ago. I spent the bulk of my career in engineering with Southern Cal Edison in nuclear power generation as part of the engineering team that built San Onofre down south of San Clemente. Following this, I was a general superintendent at Santa Anita Racetrack in Arcadia. I had all of engineering, construction, and maintenance under me. And I've rounded out my engineering experience with being a project manager for McDonald's. I built restaurants throughout California. Now retired from active duty, spend a lot of my time writing and speaking. A lot of it is on this subject. But first, before we get started any further, a little bit of background, a little bit of context. Believe it or not, I was a global warming skeptic. I admit it. Yeah, a 2 C temperature rise with just 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit is going to wreck the planet? Seriously? I mean, temperatures can vary 40 to 60 degrees in a single day. Are you trying to tell me that another 3.5 degrees is going to be catastrophic? I don't think so. Well, that was all the information I had on the topic for many years, and that's where I left it. After I retired from active duty, my wife said I was hanging around the house too much. So she finally said, "You need to get out of the house and go do something useful because you're driving me crazy. Why don't you go look at solar? You used to be interested in that." Well, that's a good idea. I think I'll do it. So I Googled solar power. What I was expecting to find was kind of the slant that I'd seen in the media again and again, where solar power was kind of a little cottage industry that really wasn't ready for prime time. But what I found was that solar power had advanced to a fully developed industry, quite sophisticated, and was capable of producing vast amounts of power. Well, you can't get very far into the renewables when you finally run up against this global warming thing. So I figured rather than just shooting my mouth off, maybe I should educate myself. So I did, and what I discovered was positively terrifying. So much so that it compelled me to write my book and take my message to the people. What I found is that the public is grossly misinformed about not only the severity and the immediacy of global warming, but also the fact that we have all the technology we need right now to fix it. So now that I've kind of come out of the closet a little bit, a little review of what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk about the global warming problem itself. It's really straightforward. It's not difficult to understand. Global warming is not a political issue, though it has been politicized, as we know. We're also going to talk about, review the basic technologies that are all available for us to be able to solve this problem. We're going to talk about the fact that the global warming problem is desperately more urgent than is being portrayed in the media. We're going to take a look and paint the picture of what catastrophic really looks like. By the time we get to this point in the presentation, you're going to understand why we actually need to stop global warming altogether. Slowing it down isn't going to work. If all we can do is slow it down, why bother doing anything at all? For us to have any measurable impact on being able to stop this thing, we can't be complacent anymore. We have to get off our little butts and we have to go do something. And finally, we'll close with something I call the Carbon Neutrality Act, which is a framework that can provide us with a blueprint of where we need to go and when we need to get there. So, the global warming problem. Global warming is really a very simple aspect of our planetary physics. Now, there's 14 known climate drivers, okay? And, well, physicists call them forcings. I'm an engineer. I think in terms of machines, so I call them drivers, okay? Most of these drivers have time frames that are too long to have the kinds of effects on the climate in the time frame that we're seeing. On the other end of the scale are what I call the short-term drivers, things like cosmic ray activity and solar flares. These can affect the climate for days, weeks, up to a few years. Of all 14 climate drivers, the only one that can produce the kinds of effects in the time frame we're seeing is the greenhouse effect. I kind of like to think of it as the Goldilocks effect, you know, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's not too long, it's not too short, it's just right. So what is the greenhouse effect? Well, I might be preaching to the choir here, but solar radiation coming to the Earth, when that solar radiation hits the top of the atmosphere, some of it gets directly reflected back into space. The rest of it comes down, strikes the Earth, and then is absorbed into the land, the seas, and the atmosphere. A small amount of this incoming radiation then is reflected back up off the surface in the form of infrared radiation. Most of it passes through the atmosphere and back into space. A small amount of it, however, it reflects off of certain airborne gases and reflects back down to the surface. These airborne gases that cause this are known as the greenhouse gases, or GHGs, as you may be familiar with. Now, there are three main greenhouse gases. The most prevalent one, of course, is water vapor. It makes up 50 to 75% of the total effect. After this is carbon dioxide. It's only 1/64th the amount of water vapor, but it makes up 20 to 25%. And then at the bottom of the list is methane. It's only 1/200th the amount of carbon dioxide, but it makes up 5 to 10% of the total effect. Now, we need the greenhouse effect because this trapping of a certain amount of thermal energy on the surface is what makes the planet habitable. That's why it's called the greenhouse effect. We can think of airborne CO2, the rheostat that controls Earth's surface temperature. More CO2 in the air, the warmer it gets, less CO2 in the air, the cooler it gets. The problem is that there is so much CO2 in the atmosphere right now that more thermal energy is being trapped on the surface that then can radiate back out into space, which was keep getting warmer and warmer. And then this link between increasing CO2 levels and surface temperatures is very clear, has been known since the 1800s. There's carbon dioxide levels on the left, and we've got increasing surface temperature on the right. They move in virtual lockstep with each other. So a very simple way to understand the global warming phenomenon, to put it in everyday terms, think of imagine that you get a pot of ice, you put it on the stove, and then you turn the fire on under the pot. Okay, now, simple question. What do you suppose is going to happen to the ice? It's going to? Yes. Oh, good. And then if you turn the fire up, it's going to melt? Yes. Wow. Okay. Fantastic. You guys are so smart. Now, you didn't need a physicist to explain this to you. I mean, it's endemic to our everyday experience. Furthermore, nobody can confuse you about what's going on. Fire, heat, melted ice. Pretty straightforward. Also, if we know how much ice we have in the pot, and we know the rate at which we are adding heat to the ice, we can calculate, using very simple grade school arithmetic, how long it will take to melt all the ice in the pot. So, understanding the global warming phenomenon, as far as what we're seeing now, is very similar. It's simply a scaled up version of our ice in the pot analogy. The only difference between the ice in the pot and the ice on the Earth is the number of zeros in the calculation. The arithmetic is exactly the same. So, for the Earth's ice in the pot is 5.7 million cubic miles of ice on the planet's surface. 90% of that is contained in the Antarctic ice sheet. The other 10% is distributed around the northern hemisphere. 90% of that is in the Greenland ice sheet, and then the rest is in the glaciers and the North Polar ice cap. Now, the Earth's fire on the stove, because of the high CO2 levels, there's more heat being trapped on the surface than it can radiate back out into space. Currently, because of the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, the surface of the Earth is picking up 22 million billion BTUs every day. Okay, more than can radiate back out into space. Now, a BTU is a British thermal unit. It's a common unit of energy measure used in the energy industry. Kind of a simple way to think of a BTU is a microwave oven operating at full power conditions will generate about 1 BTU of thermal energy per second. In the energy biz, 1 million billion BTUs is known as a quad. So the Earth is picking up 22 quads per day, more than it can radiate back into space. As a point of comparison, the entire energy output of the United States every year from all sources is about 95 quads. So that means the surface of the Earth is picking up the equivalent of our entire annual US energy output every 4.5 days. No wonder it's getting hotter. So, because we know how much ice we've got on the surface, and we know the rate at which we're adding heat to the surface, we can answer the question, how long is it going to take to boil the planet? Well, I don't mean really boil. I mean, how long will it take to melt all the ice on the planet? All of the planet to pick up enough thermal energy to melt all that ice. It's going to happen sooner than you think. Here's a figure from my book. The horizontal axis is years from 1800 to 2200. Vertical axis is total excess heat added to the surface of the Earth, and it's a cumulative number, and it's in millions of quads. Now, the curve relates airborne carbon dioxide levels to total retained thermal energy over time. Now, what's happened thus far is the black solid part of the curve right here. We are here at the end of the solid black line. Now, the dashed portion of the curve is simply an extension of the same equation used to generate the solid part of the curve, which we know that that's already happened. So if we continue on our current fossil-driven course, we can see we can easily calculate what's going to happen in the future. We will acquire enough energy to kind of boil the Arctic by about 2050 or earlier. Some calculations say about 2041. So if we continue on our fossil-driven course, then by about 2150, we will have the surface of the Earth will have acquired enough thermal energy to melt all the ice on the planet, including the Antarctic ice sheet. Now, just due to thermal lag effects, that does not mean that the Arctic will be thawed by then, but it will mean, as we'll see shortly, it's going to get very hot very fast. So 2 degrees C temperature rise over pre-industrial conditions. We know from paleogeologic information that 2 degrees C temperature rise is enough to create this ice-free Arctic condition. And that is what I call the point of no return, because it sets up a condition we'll not be able to recover from. So here's why this ice-free Arctic is what I call the point of no return. There are literally trillions of tons of ice, or trillions of tons of methane currently sequestered in the Arctic, both as frozen ground permafrost and under the Arctic Ocean in the form of methane hydrates, which is methane molecules in little cages of ice. So the nasty thing about methane as a greenhouse gas is that the heating effect of 1 ton of methane is equivalent to the heating effect of nearly 200 tons of carbon dioxide. Huge magnification factor there. Now, as the Arctic thaws, this methane becomes airborne. It's been calculated that if even a fraction of a percent of the methane currently sequestered in the Arctic becomes airborne, it will lead to a 4-fold increase in airborne methane concentration. This will be enough for methane to become the dominant global warming driver, surpassing the effects of carbon dioxide. What we'll then have set up is a runaway global warming phenomenon, one driven by methane, and once it starts, we won't be able to shut it off. And it will be self-reinforcing, meaning that higher temperature leads to more airborne methane, leads to higher temperature, more airborne methane, and away it goes. And it will continue until it runs out of enough methane to keep it going, and a new, much higher equilibrium temperature is reached. Reducing or eliminating CO2 emissions after we cross the point of no return is of no value, because global warming will no longer be dependent upon carbon dioxide. So after we cross this point of no return, if that happens, global warming will accelerate. In fact, the amount of warming we currently see in a year will be occurring every 12 days, and the amount of warming currently seen in an entire generation will be occurring every 12 months. We won't be able to shut it off, and it's estimated that surface temperatures will rise 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Yow. So you see, it's not the 2 degrees C temperature rise that's going to wreck the planet. It's what gets unleashed that will wreck the planet. So, can we fix it? Well, there is a technical solution that exists right now. As we will see, we already have everything we need to create a technologically advanced, earth-friendly, people-oriented civilization that can provide us with all the electricity, water, and fuel that we will ever need into the unlimited future. By the way, this renewable model that I outline in my book says we don't need to have any scrimping, shrinking, or living small. We can enjoy the same free-flowing type of lifestyle that we enjoy today. We just won't wreck the planet in the process. So, the major requisites that make our civilization work are electricity, water, and fuel. And here I mean both motive fuel and heating fuel. Now, I could easily talk for an hour just on these topics alone, but here on the next few slides, I will just hit a few high spots just to give the general idea. So, electricity. Renewables can provide all of our power before 2050. Now, from 2000 to 2011, solar grew. By the way, I've reduced the analysis to solar alone, even though we know that solar, wind, and hydro will comprise this renewable energy sources. But just to make the analysis easy, just to give us the idea, I've reduced it all to solar, showing that even if that was the only thing available to us, we could still get there from here. So between 2000 and 2011, solar grew at a average rate of 21% per year in this country. Other countries, some of the other countries, particularly in Europe and places like that, their solar capacity was growing up to 41% per year. Well, simply by continuing this demonstrated rate of growth, meaning we know we can do this, so we know we can get there, we can see that solar can provide all of our electricity by 2041 and all of our power in toto by 2048. Now, renewables are intermittent energy sources, which means they don't run all the time. And yet we use power all day long. So we need to have the capacity to be able to store large amounts of energy while the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. Well, there are lots of fledgling technologies being developed right now. There's a big focus on batteries. The national labs have done literally thousands of studies and research projects on batteries with very little results in being able to produce a truly usable product that can store the vast amounts of energy that we're going to need. In fact, Professor Jack Brouwer from UC Irvine's Advanced Power Group has calculated that our global energy storage cost provided by batteries would be $47 trillion per day. We can't get there from here with batteries. And yet there is an energy storage technology that's been around for decades that has the capacity to be able to store very large quantities of energy. It just hasn't been focused on very much. It's starting to receive some of the attention it's due. And that energy format is compressed air energy storage, or CAES, as it's known in the energy industry. The plant on the left is in Huntorp, Germany, has a 270 megawatt capacity, and was brought online in 1978. And the plant on the right is in Alabama, is operated by PowerSouth. It has a 110 megawatt capacity and came online in 1991. So this has been around for a while. Now, the heart of a CAES plant is in the storage of compressed air. That's what drives the turbines that turns the generator that produces electricity that goes out onto the grid. The only real difference between a CAES plant and a typical electrical generating station we're familiar with today is in the motive force that turns the turbine. Instead of steam, as we usually see, it's compressed air. Now, the EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, envisions that a typical CAES plant could produce 300 megawatts of power for 8 hours at a time on a single charge of compressed air. Now, these plants are starting to show up, a little bit at a time, but they are starting to be built. Like There's a 300 megawatt plant going up in Bakersfield, California. There's a 150 megawatt plant going up in Watkins Glen, New York. And there's a 317 megawatt plant going up in Anderson County, Texas. So we know we can store large amounts of energy. All we need to do is build the plants. Water. We're outrunning our ability to supply water. The amount of water we can sustainably use is from the weather systems, rain, snowpack, and such as that. We are currently outrunning that by a huge amount. And in fact, our water tables across the country have dropped an average of 300 feet over the last 60 years. Some places it's been even higher. For example, in Chicago, it's over 900 feet that they've dropped. This is unsustainable, okay? The amount of water, our shortfall is 70,000 million gallons per day. We're draining our water tables and our aquifers horribly. Now, conservation measures might help a little bit, but just the shortfall, which is 20% of the total usage, is more than all of our residential, commercial, and industrial water usage combined. So the only way we're going to really be able to make up the difference is by constructing a lot of desalination plants. The estimate would be 700 large-scale desalination plants of 100 million gallon per day capacity each. The new Poseidon plant down in San Diego is 50 million gallons per day capacity. So that gives you an idea of the quantity that we need to be able to solve this problem. Now these are nationwide numbers, okay? Out here it's a little more aggravated simply because of the fact that we live where we live. More than 120 countries around the world use desalinated water to one degree or another. In 2009, there were more than 14,000 plants around the world. By 2012, there are over 21,000 plants. Desalinated water usage is increasing at the rate of about 12% per year. So if we're going to have any hope of being able to sustain our water supplies for our civilization, we need to turn to desalinated water. Motive fuel. The toughest nut to crack in the whole global warming arena is in the area of transportation. With rare exception, virtually all of our transportation is powered by petroleum and natural gas. In fact, nationwide, 31% of our emissions are from our conveyances. In California, it's even higher, 36%. It's the single largest source of our emissions in this state. Now, the typical mantra we hear is that we need to electrify, okay, and abandon our fossil burners for battery electric vehicles. Well, the reality is that there is no battery electric technology that exists today or in a definable future that can truly replace the internal combustion engine. This suffers from a whole litany of problems and issues and shortcomings that you just don't seem to be able to overcome. The three biggest ones, of course, being they don't have the range, they take forever to recharge, and they're too small to be viable on a mass scale. There is one fully developed automotive technology that exists right now that can replace the internal combustion engine. That's the hydrogen-powered fuel cell electric vehicle, or FCV, as it's often referred to. These vehicles can replace the internal combustion engine and overcome the problems that persist for the battery electrics. For example, they have the range. Current generation FCVs, depending on the type of model you get, will go 250 to 340 miles on a single tank of fuel.
Can a Tesla.
Pardon me?
So can a Tesla.
Yeah, I know. Okay, sure. They refuel very quickly. I mean, you can fully fuel a FCV in about 5 minutes. Full tank, 5 minutes. And then the fueling process is virtually identical to what you do with your fossil burners right now. You pull in the gas station, take the hose off the clip, fill up, pay, you're on your way. And they're comfortable vehicles. The vehicle shown in the upper right corner there is Hyundai's Tucson fuel cell. And in fact, our fuel cell, my wife and I, we drive that car. It's very comfortable to drive. And it seats 5 adults You can put the back seat down. You've got a large storage area in the back of the vehicle. And they're really, frankly, fun to drive on the open road. I had the opportunity earlier this year to take our fuel cell, drive it from LA to San Francisco. Okay, I made the whole trip in about 8 hours, including fuel stops and rest stops. Took the Grapevine full speed, no restriction in performance, did 80 to 85 miles an hour all the way up through the San Joaquin Valley, used the air conditioning the entire trip, no problem. So, in fact, Honda is coming out with an updated version of their Clarity. I had the good fortune to be able to test drive one of those a couple weeks ago, even before the automotive journal press got hold of them. Thank you, Anita, I appreciate it. And the car is really, really nice. Beautiful styling. It's luxurious on the inside. It's got all the bells and whistles, and it's a rocket. I mean, you jump on that accelerator, and you're doing 65 before you know it. So, how many miles? Yeah. About 340 on a single tank. Pretty nice. Yeah, that's right. Write it down. Thank you very much, so I don't get sidetracked. I could talk forever about this technology. Fuel cells overcome some of the other problems that are being seen by the battery electrics. I'm not trying to badmouth battery electrics because there will be they will be part of our renewable infrastructure. I'm just trying to give some more texture on what's available. The fuel cells and FCVs are designed to last the life of the vehicle, not requiring replacement. FCVs are scalable, both in range and vehicle size. Fuel cell powered buses have been on the road for more than 10 years already. There are heavy-duty trucks powered by fuel cells. They're in field trials right now at the ports of LA and Long Beach. And fuel cell powered locomotives are already on the drawing boards. In fact, China has a fuel cell powered light rail train in operation right now. So if it rolls on wheels from forklifts to trains, fuel cells can provide the power. Now, fuel cell vehicles are powered by hydrogen gas. Environmentally benign hydrogen gas can be produced by renewably generated electricity and water by a process known as electrolysis. The only exhaust that comes out the back end of an FCV is water vapor. So driving an FCV leaves 0 carbon footprint. And that's true for whether you go point A is one place and point B could be across town or across the country. Makes no difference. You can drive them just like a regular car. Now, the only problem that we've got right now is that there's almost a complete lack of hydrogen fueling stations where you get gas. And I mean gas, not gasoline. California has undertaken a project called the California Fuel Cell Project, which has as its goal to build a network of 100 hydrogen fueling stations throughout the state in the next few years. They're about a third of the way finished right now. And they feel that amount will be enough for the manufacturers to start releasing more vehicles. Car manufacturers already have these things waiting. They're just waiting for the fueling stations. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi, Volkswagen, Honda, Toyota, Hyundai, they're all just sitting there waiting. Okay, we're ready. Okay, let's get some gas. What I've shown here these are 2 actual refueling stations. The one in the middle there is at Cal State LA, and the upper left is in La Cañada, Flint Ridge. I use both of those stations frequently. So I'm of the opinion that once the public embraces this technology, the age of oil is over. And we will truly be able to turn the corner on global warming when that happens. So, heating fuel. Right now, a lot of our heating for industry, residential, commercial, comes from the use of natural gas and propane and other hydrocarbon fuels. It's very easy to replace all of that with renewably generated electricity. We already have electric appliances. We just need to use more of them. Hydrogen is already widely used in industry. These are a photograph of a typical electrolysis generator, electrolysis machine that's used in industry, and the burners already exist. Industry already uses hydrogen, just use more of it. On the residential front, the unit shown here is a residential unit. It's actually made by Honda, and Japan is actually working on developing retrofits for the burners to go from natural gas to hydrogen. So the technology ain't sexy, but it works. So what I've shown here in these last few slides is that all the technologies we need to be able to convert to a fully renewable civilization already exist. All we need to do is do it. As people in the renewable sector like to say, the problem isn't technology, it's politics. Some like to say that, well, converting to a renewable civilization is going to bring economic ruin. Well, I don't think so. Pull out all the stops, full-on conversion to a renewable economy will result in a 6 to 12% annual economic growth rate that can be maintained for at least an entire generation and that can produce unprecedented affluence and abundance.
Don't you need the water to pull the hydrogen out to create the hydrogen gas?
Yeah, the total water usage for creating hydrogen is about 1/500th of all the water we use. One rainstorm would supply all the water we need for electrolysis. So, now that we've found out we can actually get there from here, let's take a look at how urgent this problem is. Which of these futures would you want to live in? Future A, blistering heat, barren landscapes, rising oceans, and mass decimation of the world's population. Or would you rather, it's starvation, absolutely. Or would you rather live in future B, fertile landscapes, snow-capped peaks, green meadows and forests, peaceful seas, and human abundance? Let me think about that. Which of these futures would you want your children or grandchildren to live in? Children being born today may likely still be alive in 2150. These are covers of two well-known magazines here, well-respected magazines here in the United States. They both run articles asserting that with medical and health technologies advancing the way they are, children being born today will likely live to be in the range of 135 years old, maybe older. Now add 135 to 2050 and you get 2150. The children being born today, if we don't get off this fossil fuel course like right now, likely will see the end of civilization as we know it. And these are the infants, the toddlers, and the preschoolers who are around us right now. So think about that. In fact, we have 2 grandchildren. When I realized this, when this dawned on me, I became terrified of the future they'll witness if we don't stop this fossil fuel thing in its tracks right now. We don't have generations to think about it. It's up to us right now. Still get emotional every time I think about it. And the media's climate change focus is things like rising oceans and more severe storms. Well, these will affect some people more than others, some not at all. Okay? But unfortunately, these aren't the real killer, the thing that's going to affect mankind altogether. The real and immediate killer will be rapidly rising temperatures. Remember that 22 degrees we talked about, temperature rise a few minutes ago? This is what we can expect. The left column here of numbers shows current peak temperatures and number of cities throughout the continental United States. The center column shows projected temperatures as of about 2100. Hot, but still not deadly in most cases. The right-hand column shows the kinds of temperatures our children or grandchildren are going to be exposed to by 2150.
Why are
And
the first ones so high?
what?
Why are the first ones on your present so high?
Those are the current peak temperatures
Peak is,
taken off of weather data.
peak is in summer.
Maximum, yeah, okay.
Every, once a year.
Okay.
Kind of
Now, so the right-hand column shows what temperatures could be expected to be by the middle of the next century. Let's see, Phoenix, Arizona, 144 degrees. Los Angeles, right here, 135. Gainesville, Florida, 130. Omaha, Nebraska, 129.
Even
Denver.
Alaska.
Anchorage, Alaska, a mere 107. Won't kill you, but it's a little warmish. And way up there in north in Madison, Wisconsin, we usually think it's kind of coolish, 126. What's going to happen to all the surface water? It's going to evaporate. What's going to happen to all the crops? They grow during the summertime. They're going to fry year after year after year, because once we set this up, the climate won't return to what it is now for tens of thousands of years or longer. So this is a game ender. Look at a meat thermometer. Meat is cooked at 140 degrees. What happens to a small child or a pet that's locked in a car on a hot summer day? They're dead in a couple of hours.
There are the bees, all the bees will die.
These are the outside air temperatures. They'll kill us quickly. Well, not us. We won't be here. Our children and grandchildren, depending how old you are. So beyond this, here's what we can look forward to as we fry the planet and nearly everyone on it. This uninhabitability of the planet is going to come on gradually, gaining momentum as time goes. It's already starting, like Syria, for example. Maybe the mass exodus isn't due just to the civil war, but it's the fact that it's the unremitting drought there. Bangladesh, rising oceans.
Ethiopia too.
Lots of places around the world are starting to feel it. In fact, the southern end of the Mississippi River Delta is losing an area the size of a football field every day due to rising waters. So we can look forward to chronic drought here in the western states. Recent report released by UCLA says that with the global warming problem the way it is, we're possibly at the front end of a 100-year-long drought. Yikes. Looking forward to depleted aquifers across the country, severe storms and flooding in the Midwest, East, and Gulf states. Rising oceans will drown cities. First to go will probably be southern Florida. The continental U.S. get hotter and hotter and eventually deadly. Tens of millions of desperate people will try migrating north and inland. Some likely actions. Martial law invoked just to maintain order, probably on a permanent basis. It's been done on relatively minor skirmishes before, like just race riots. You know, also the anti-Vietnam War protests, like at Kent University. So can you imagine something that's 1,000 times that scale? Crisis management. The government may be put in the position of having to relocate millions of people onto federal land and then provide housing them in government-supplied housing, basically taking care of them. We've already got a precedent during the Second World War when the Japanese Americans were sequestered onto detention facilities. Global warming will just get more and more severe and eventually deadly. So 2150 and beyond, where's the planet going? Most of the planet between 55 degrees north latitude and 55 degrees south latitude will be largely uninhabitable. It's just too damn hot during the summertime. This would include most of North America, all of Central America, most of South America, except for the very southern tip of South America, most of Europe, most of Asia, all of the Mideast, all of Southeast Asia, all of Africa, all of India, all of Australia, and New Zealand. So where do we go to live. There will be a narrow strip of land just south of the Arctic Circle, about 500 miles wide, that will still be habitable. Well, it won't be cold by then. It will be temperate. And several hundred million to a billion people will try and squeeze into an area that's not much bigger than the continental United States.
But it's mostly controlled by Russia, too.
Two-thirds of that area is controlled by Russia. Most of the rest by Canada. The dregs is Alaska, which is the U.S., Finland, Sweden, Norway, Greenland, and Iceland. So where are we going to go to survive? Like the song says, north to Alaska. Okay, Alaska is very big, 663,000 square miles. Unfortunately, almost half of it lies north of the Arctic Circle, which means it's uninhabitable on a year-round basis. Most of the rest of the state is mountainous. The net of that is that there's about 50,000 miles of potentially arable land in the entire state, which will support a maximum population of about 25 million people. Now, here's the conundrum we've got. We've got over 300 million people in the U.S. right now. There'll be enough space up in Alaska for about 1 in 12 people from the continental United States. Bit of a problem. What that will do, if that happens, we'll be faced with a very, very, very difficult situation. Such a situation will likely galvanize our deepest natures. And I wouldn't even want to be in the position of having to decide that. I mean, how are we going to act? Are we going to trample our compatriots like we're in a stampede? Or are we going to be noble, as in the Titanic disaster, where preferential treatment was given to women and children because there weren't enough lifeboat space for all the passengers and crew? So, any way you cut this, we've got difficult choices. It's almost incomprehensible how we will act when we're faced with these kinds of situations. So, can we really solve this, or is it hopeless? Now you see why we have to actually stop this thing in its tracks. We don't have very long to do it. Excuse me. So here's the challenge we've got to do that. We've got to stop buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere. We have to actually reduce CO2 levels back to 350 parts per million because that's considered the safe upper limit. We blew through that in 1988. We went through 400 parts per million just 3 years ago. And in fact, we're at 408 parts per million today. The CO2 concentrations have gone up 4 parts per million just in the last 12 months. I think we're going the wrong way, folks. And we need to convert to a renewable energy base. We need to abandon all fossil fuels and other hydrocarbons. Here's the problem. As we saw earlier, we're fast approaching this point of no return, at which time global warming takes on a life of its own, becomes methane-driven and irreversible, and accelerates. So we need to achieve an 80 to 90% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions globally in the next 5 years. We're looking at the airborne CO2 limit, or the next 10 years tops, given the ice-free Arctic limit. Now, just a simple question. What do you think the odds are of us actually being able to do that in the next few years?
Very slim.
Something like between none and none?
Slim.
Yeah, exactly.
Less after this week.
There's a challenge, that's right. It's also an opportunity. So, we have to buy the time somehow to be able to interrupt, we have to interrupt the warming process temporarily so that we can achieve all these objectives. But how are we going to do that? Through something I call planetary triage. Basically, we have to take Earth to the emergency room.
Yes.
Okay? So I'm just going to warn you right now that the following material is extremely controversial. I don't like to have to talk about it. This might be upsetting to people, but as part of the total picture, I have to talk about it. So, from the climate drivers, we know that large volcanoes temporarily cool the planet. In fact, a benchmark event was the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia. 100 million tons of sulfur dioxide ejected into the upper atmosphere. That was enough to cool the entire planet full 1 degree C in the course of the next year.
Was Is that Krakatoa?
Krakatoa was another one. There are several others. And so there's a database showing that using these facts, we can actually create an engineered volcano. Now, we can achieve the same effect artificially through a process known as geoengineering or climate engineering, first studied under Lyndon Johnson's administration in the 1960s. This concept, very simply, is if we can shroud the planet in a reflective material, we can temporarily cool the surface. Now, we can accomplish this two ways. We can do it by air and by sea. By air, I like to think of it as chemotherapy for the planet. And I use the term chemotherapy on purpose because we know chemotherapy can cure somebody of cancer if it doesn't kill the patient first, right? So based on available information, I've calculated that a fleet of 75 commercial-sized jets, each making 3 flights daily, could put enough reflective material into the upper atmosphere in about 12 months to cool the surface 0.2 degrees Celsius.
Aren't they doing that now with the chemtrails?
You think?
DARPA?
You think? Okay. Now, there's a huge amount of controversy around this. There's lots of stuff going on, and a lot of negative things being said about that, and they're all valid. Okay? Compounds being dispersed, sulfur dioxide and aluminum dust. There's a whole litany of negative consequences of doing that. From sulfur dioxide, acid rain. From aluminum dust, increase in neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, for example. So there's a significant danger factor if the compounds aren't reformulated. Good news is that more benign compounds are being developed presently. So how do we do this by sea? We can create a manufactured Arctic cloud layer by deploying a fleet of specially designed ships into the Arctic Ocean that can atomize seawater to create a reflective cloud cover over this surface. And what we can maintain that reflective cloud cover during the 6-month Arctic day to keep the sun's incoming energy from actually striking the surface. We can help keep it cool. And then we can let that cloud cover dissipate during the 6-month Arctic night to allow surface heat to radiate back into space. Okay, so all this looks really neat. Okay, how long are we going to have to do this? Well, as long as is needed to keep the planet cool enough so we can convert to renewables and get CO2 levels back down to 350 parts per million. In other words, for a while. Okay, well, how much is this adventure going to cost us? Well, the outrageous sum of about $3 billion per year. It's chump change. I mean, it's an amount that is so trivial, so small, that could actually be funded by a private group, a small consortium of eco-minded, super-rich individuals could take this on all by themselves, meaning there's no intervention or approval from the government needed, and by limiting dispersal operations to international airspace and waters, they can operate with some level of autonomy. So I don't like having to say this. I don't like having to face it myself. I don't like having to tell you all this stuff. But if we're going to have any hope of stopping global warming and preventing the demise of mankind, we're kind of against the wall. The sad thing is that had our energy technology been allowed to keep up with our communications technology over the last 60 years, there would be no global warming now. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. We've now painted ourselves into a corner. This is the only way out. We are literally at the brink. We're at a fork in the road. If we do nothing or too little, we decimate the planet, and 90% of the world's population dies in our own grandchildren's lifetime. If we solve the problem, which we know we can do, we restore the planet to its wondrous beauty, and mankind can flourish. Yeah, there are things being done, but given the scale of the problem, as you've seen, and what we have to get done in the amount of time we've got available to us, the politicians are doing too little, too late, as is big business. They're plodding along, and we're not going to get there from here if we leave it up to them. So it's not up to them. It has to be us. It's the rise of the activists. This is going to be the era in which we get off our complacent little butts and we go do something. So the problem is not technology, is what we already talked about. The opportunity we've got ahead of us is that we can demonstrate our collective will. Very important. Effecting change requires action. We have to do something. how we think, how we act individually, and how we act as a group. How we think. It's imperative that we change our thinking. In fact, this is the single most important part of this whole thing, is how we think. Here are some thoughts on changing our thinking from various individuals you may have heard about. Dr. Wayne Dyer, famous psychologist, very well known in certain circles. He said that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It may sound trite, but if you really focus on that for a while, you realize that's a very profound statement. Napoleon Hill, he wrote Think and Grow Rich, sold more than 70 million copies worldwide. He said, you become what you think about most of the time. This gentleman, you recognize him, President Kennedy. He said, our problems are man-made, therefore they may be solved by man. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. We made the global warming mess, we can still clean it up, but we got to get busy. And finally, Albert Einstein said, the problems that exist in the world today cannot be solved by the level of thinking that created them. So to solve the global warming problem requires us to raise our level of thinking. If we feel there's no hope, we give up and we don't even bother looking for a solution. We become powerless and hopeless. The feeling of powerlessness is at the very bottom of the emotional scale, and people in this state of mind can be manipulated and controlled with almost no effort whatsoever. However, if we allow the possibility that the problem can be solved, our minds then begin looking for solutions. We become empowered. And an empowerment is at the very top of the emotional scale and is the feeling we can do anything we set our minds to. It is extremely difficult to manipulate and control empowered and awake people. So what can we do individually besides just raising our thinking? Well, there's a simple group of things I like to talk about. I call them the algorithm. Okay? Remember Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. In that book, he outlines 12 things that individuals can do to help reduce carbon dioxide emissions. I've listed some of them here. The good news is they help us to retrain our thinking and actually do make a positive impact. However, they won't solve the problem by themselves. Even if everybody on the planet did all 12 of those algorithms, it would reduce total CO2 emissions about 22%. We actually need to achieve an 80 to 90% reduction, which is why, but beyond what we can do individually, we need to take collective action. One of the things that's frequently talked about is the idea of critical mass. Now, critical mass is actually a technical term that's used by nuclear physicists and nuclear engineers in the building of nuclear power plants. So I used to do that stuff, so I'm a little bit familiar with that. The term, as it's popularly used, refers to the notion that it only takes a small amount of the total becoming active to effect change. And as this small amount of the total grows, it eventually reaches a state where it begins a self-sustaining chain reaction that eventually encompasses the whole thing, whatever the thing is. Okay? This critical threshold is the critical mass. Now, it doesn't take everybody to affect change. It doesn't even take a majority. All it takes is enough. And enough can be a very small percentage of the entire total. In my book, I cite several examples of how just 10% of the adult population, all acting with a single mind and taking action that the entrenched power structure is not expecting, can actually bring about this change. It's shifting the momentum. That's what you're trying to do. It's like in a football game. We've all seen how the momentum can shift from one team to another, even in a single play. So we can make use of this notion of critical mass so that we can become active, going rogue, as I like to say it. Okay, we'll briefly look at 3 different types of activism. They're all important. Making noise, the example here is 350.org, founded in 2008 by Bill McKibben. They see climate change as, everybody knows Bill McKibben here, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. Been around since the 1980s and beating the climate drum, and he's been a longtime champion of this. They see climate change as the most important issue facing humanity, which it is, and they organize coordinated action in demonstrating and things like that. You know, they do demonstrations on street corners and blockades and, you know, occupying, you know, City Hall and, you know, stormtrooping in meeting chambers and stuff like that.
And the silver roof on the White House, Mr. McCarthy.
Good for, that's right. So that's an example of making noise. Doing something. Example here is Climate Resolve, founded in 2010 by Jonathan Parfrey here in Los Angeles, dedicated to creating real practical solutions to the climate problem, inspire people to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and they strive for real material changes that are actually ambitious, achievable, and equitable. I belong to this outfit once I found out about it. Good group of people. And then finally, there's influencing policymakers. The example here is Citizens Climate Lobby, founded in 2007 by Marshall Saunders, developer from San Diego. They're focused on national policies and making certain things law so that people have to take positive steps in reducing climate impacts. Entirely volunteer-based, and they actually train their people to go back and lobby with our federally elected representatives. They believe that politicians don't create political will, they simply respond to it. So politicians are like wind vanes, okay? You know, they just, whatever way the wind is blowing, they go that way, okay? So if we want to change the way a politician looks or does things, we have to provide the wind, okay? So we're entering the new age of activism. We have to empower ourselves. We can't wait for somebody else to do it. They're not doing it. We have to change, not them. If we change, they change automatically. So we got to do this. In fact, we need to mount a World War II level of effort. We have to mount it. All hands on deck, all out war against global warming, and we need to start that within the next 5 to 10 years tops, or we can just forget about it. So we need to take to the streets en masse. This has been done many times before. Okay, examples include things like the liberation of India from the British, the women's suffrage movement, the anti-Vietnam War protests, and the civil rights movement. Now, all of these were successful because they each had a specific objective. They knew exactly what they were going for. They could define it, they could nail it on the wall and say, this is where we're going, okay? The late Stephen R. Covey, in his very popular book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said that we need to begin with the end in mind. This is fundamental and essential. The problem is that the climate change movement suffers from having no definition of what the end result should look like, how we should get there, or when we should get there. So we wander around like we're lost in the desert, and we waste the little time that we do have for fixing this thing. So to succeed, we need a plan specifying what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. A draft of what I call the Carbon Neutrality Act gives us a specific objective, nail it to the wall. And relentless public pressure from the activists will give Congress the motivation to pass the act. Remember, they're just weather vanes. When we when we create the wind, they'll go that way. So the Carbon Neutrality Act, well, what is that? Well, I made it up. Okay, the whole text is in the appendix to my book. A little bit of kind of regulatory jargon here. The United States will be carbon neutral by 2050. Carbon neutrality is defined as carbon and carbon dioxide generation from all sources being equal to or less than all carbon and carbon dioxide mitigation sources. Yeah, sounds cool. Some of the major provisions could include things like all electric power generation from renewables and fully implemented by 2040. Electrolysis generated hydrogen, what I call EH2, available at all fueling stations by 2030. Planetary cooling shroud, put up and maintained for as long as necessary to achieve the necessary changes. Compressed air or energy storage facilities built and constructed such that 400,000 megawatts of capacity be installed and operating by 2040. Natural gas, propane, and other hydrocarbon fuels will be replaced by the use of electricity or EH2 by 2040. All groundwater depletion will cease by 2035. all commercial and private aircraft will use ethanol fuel exclusively by 2035. The aviation industry is already working on this. Ethanol motive fuels will be produced from feedstocks that are at least 90% efficient in their carbon cycle recapture. That is not corn. Corn is 7%. It's actually energy net negative, meaning that it takes more energy to grow and produce the ethanol from corn than the ethanol has.
Yeah, it takes a gallon
You're going
of gas.
backward, going backwards. And finally, reforestation of the United States landmass will proceed such that the forest cover will, by 2050, increase by 100% over 2015 levels. So, what do we learn today? Well, we've learned that the global warming problem is real, imminent, and severe if we don't take care of it. We've learned that we can actually get there from here. All we have to do is do it. We've learned that if we don't tackle this thing in very short order, our grandchildren are all dead. To actually stop global warming long enough so we can fix it, we're going to have to do some things that may be unsavory and may incur risk, but we really have no choice. And effecting this means that complacency isn't going to cut it. We've got to get to be active. And the Carbon Neutrality Act gives us something to nail on the wall as a place to start. So, which future would you want will be our legacy to our children and grandchildren? Future A or future B? It's up to us, not them, not the next several generations, us, right now. Everybody sitting in this room. Got to take action now, okay? Me writing my book, me standing in front of you right now, that's me taking action. Us driving a fuel cell vehicle, that's us taking action. You can help me take action, okay? I'm available to talk to groups about the immediacy of global warming and how we can fix it. You can email me or you can text me. What I've covered today only scratches the surface of what this book contains. You can learn more about it or order the book from endingglobalwarming.com. You can order it through brick and mortar bookstores. You can also get it online. I wrote my book for the general public in terms that would make the topic easy to understand. I did not write it for the pundits or the experts. Anybody of reasonable intelligence can understand this topic. I've had more than one reader tell me that this was the one book on global warming they'd always been looking for, but thought they would never find. Half the book deals with global warming and the technical solution to it. The other half of the book deals with the human element, because that's the critical factor that's going to solve this thing. This is what's going to make the difference and determine the outcome. And oddly enough, the global warming problem is actually mankind's greatest opportunity, if you think about it. If we can set aside our differences long enough to learn to cooperate with each other to solve this civilization-ending problem we've got on our hands right now, I feel we will actually enter an entirely new era for mankind. Thank you.